like are going to say, why didn't she include X? I'm including my selection of important buildings that I think you should have seen. And this is, as I said, this is not for the final. There are a couple of names you should know. These are things you should know about. This is downtown, next to, really, this is west of Ground Zero, just west of Ground Zero. This is the Hudson River. Kelly did the Winter Garden, which is the these buildings are the World Financial Center. This is the Winter Garden, decorated because it was a good shot, decorated for Christmas a few years ago. The Winter Garden space should remind you, if you remember, the Crystal Palace. With that kind of architecture, they had to acclimatize the palm trees someplace down south. They grew in South America. They brought them down south till they became accustomed to a more northern climate before they put them in here. And this is surrounded by, it was restaurants. They're redoing it now, but restaurants and shops. And out here is the largest marina in Manhattan. When luxury yachts want to dock in Manhattan, they come down here. So you can see a couple of spaces here. Who has been here?
I've passed by it.
Because what happens is, well, first of all, from the viewing area here between these two buildings, you can look out on the building of Ground Zero. From the end of it, you can walk down here. I mean, ignore this. You can walk down from here through Battery Park, all the way down to the Bowery, and now it's connecting all the way up the west side. And it's a nice area. I mean, this time of year, it's not as pleasant to walk outdoors. After World War II, about immediately after, once Japan rebuilt, there was a generation of Japanese architects whose ideas translated to the Western world, many of whom, including Taniguchi, who designed the new Museum of Modern Art, many of them came over and worked in America. Kenzo Tange is perhaps the most famous of the early ones, and this is just one of his buildings, which is, see, you can't always put a label on styles. What, is it high tech? Is it, you want to know it's late modernism. I mean, if we want to lump things into a classification, but I want you to understand that we can't classify all of them. One of my favorite, the Museum of Modern Art had an exhibition called, it was the, I haven't got the title right, but it was like the unconventional house. It was residential housing, new types of residential housing in the early part of this century. And this was my favorite in them because I thought, who could ever do this in New York? This is not lace curtains. This is not mesh curtains. This is some sort of heavy fabric. This is a real house that was built in Tokyo. Shigeru Ban is an architect who's become celebrated for his innovative use of materials and now for his use of environmentally friendly materials. This is an indication of his wanting to make the use of sunlight when you have it available. He's done a lot of work with bamboo. He's done those structure. He did a tea house out of bamboo. He's done residence out of bamboo. He has done exhibit areas out of containers. A student this afternoon said she saw something, a schoolhouse in Brooklyn. Someone else knew an expansion. Containers that they ship with. They're pre-built. They're already there. If the container shippers aren't using them, you can put them to a better use. So they're being used for housing. I've seen retail stores built out of containers. This is something to watch. And Ban did a structure that was a series of shipping containers that were a photography gallery for an exhibition that was like on 15th Street in the river, done on a pier downtown. The advantage was we saw the exhibition. It was open like for a few weeks. They packed it up in the containers, shipped it out to Los Angeles or something, and put it together again. So they could ship it on freight shipping and travel it around the world that way. The Reichstag, this is similar to what was done in a way at the Louvre Museum. The Reichstag wanted to have an extension of visitor center for the building. This is the city of Berlin. It's a government-owned building. It's now, it's a historic building. Lots of people come. They have a bookstore. They wanted to expand it. Now, either you think this is a brilliant solution to the problem by Foster and Partners. Norman Foster is one of the two leading British architects today. The other one is Richard Rogers. You saw the work by Rogers at Piano, the Pompidou Center. Actually, I'm not showing you any other Rogers work. But Foster did this, and either you think it's a brilliant solution, or you think it's that it's a travesty because it ruins this neoclassical building. You can take it either way, but it does make a fabulous visitor center with light coming into it. The Seattle Public Library took the adventurous step, because they weren't looking to have our towers come to the library. They wanted to make the building accessible to residents of Seattle. But think, Seattle is dark. It rains a lot. When it isn't raining, it's cloudy. Apparently, it takes now every time I've been to Seattle, the sun came out. I mean, I've been there, I think, 4 times. The sun wasn't there every day, but I am always told this is very rare. Most of the time, it's days like today. So the idea of a space that could bring light in was very appealing. And it's sort of deconstructed as maybe, but you don't have to label it. But he has light coming into the building at angles set to catch the sun. And apparently the stacks are hidden in the interior, so that the books which can't stand a lot of light are protected. This is the other building, and this is the other caption I lost. Foster and Partners. Norman Foster built this. This is the Hearst building. Hearst Publications, which is now House Beautiful and El Decor and a whole bunch of others. This is on the southwest corner of 57th and 8th Avenue. Here's the original building. It's an Art Deco building built by Joseph Urban, who was actually a Wiener Werkstatt architect who came over to America. He was unsuccessful in running the Wiener Werkstatt store, but he became a set designer and an architect. I mean, you see, he designed this. William Randolph Hearst always intended the building to be built tall, and it never was. So Hearst finally, a few years ago, wanted to build it. They awarded the commission, and Foster decided, I'm not going to build a pseudo Art Deco building. I'm going to leave that as the base and do something contemporary. This was the first skyscraper that went up after 9/11. It opened in 2006. It was a big deal because it meant New York was coming back. It was also the first, I think gold, the first LEED certified to be built in New York. And unfortunately, you can't go up to this space because this is the lobby and area. You can go in here and you can look up, and you're not allowed. You can see a waterfall, which is like a continuing waterfall that goes along the escalator that leads up. But because of 9/11, you can't get in unless you have an appointment with somebody at Hearst. But this is sort of their town hall gathering place. The structural beams are kept visible. The exterior structure is showing, and the stresses are reduced in a building that would have normally gone vertically, but the stresses are reduced because the structural beams are at an angle. This is Liebeskin's original plan. There were a bunch of architects. I think it was about 10 architectural firms competed for the master plan for the World Trade Center. Liebeskin won. Most of the buildings aren't following his plan. They're following the plan in terms of where they are. They're not following his design guidelines because, you get the commission to do this building, whoever's paying for the building can do whatever they want with it. If the master plan had been followed, whether you like it or not, this would have been a more harmonious space architecturally. I'm telling you some of these things because I want you as design students to be thinking about things like this. To look and not just say, oh, is it pretty? To say, do they all go together? Do they relate to it? Are they contextually sensible? You know, do they work for where they are? Do they belong to the city? Do they belong to each other? This is the kind of thing you're going to judge when the Trade Center is finished. They're not going to belong to each other. I don't know if they're going to belong to the city. You know, the way it is now, they're controversial about whether there's going to be a street that goes through the center.
Yeah.
But there may be a lot of, you know, bomb reducing or bomb suppressing guidelines outside that keep it from being part of the city. This is what the PATH station was supposed to look like. I don't know how it will look when it's finished, by Calatrava. There is now a structure where you see the beginning of this framework, but because it is going to cost, I don't know, several $1 million more than it was projected to, they've scaled down this design. This is going to be a large hall. So you come up from the path, and this is going to be, hopefully, a very inviting space. They're going to rent out for special events. And this is going to be a transportation hub. But what you see here is the engineering aspect of it, bringing in the light and the structure that you can know is possible because computers make it possible. Stephen Hole, who did the Kiasma Art Museum, did Simmons Hall at MIT, which looks like Swiss cheese. The critics say it looks like Swiss cheese. The students say it's a very congenial and light-filled space to live in. It's a dormitory. This is a very ingenious thing in Shenzhen, China. Most of the building, I should tell you, in the past decade, virtually every major architect in the world, not just the Americans, are building in China and the Middle East. Why? Because these are the places in China, because they have the space to build and the people to house, to live in the spaces. In the Middle East, because they have the money, so that they can build new cities. So you don't look at buildings like this and say, why don't we do anything like this in America? You couldn't do anything like this in New York. We don't have the space. We don't have the people. This horizontal skyscraper is a residence. We have the space out in Wyoming, but you don't need 600 apartments in the middle of Wyoming. So he didn't want to build high. He wasn't permitted to build